Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Dear students, welcome back to our subjects, organization behavior. Today, inshallah, we're going to take the subject here, organization conflict and negotiation. Talking about behavior, these are among the topics that may have impact on employees' behavior. And accordingly, we will take this subject in terms of its effect on employees' behavior. During this session, we will have the following objectives. Define conflict in the workplace, explain the potential outcomes of organization conflict, identify the different sources of conflict, discuss the strategies and the ways used to manage conflict, discuss negotiation and the situational influences affecting this process, and also explain the role of the third party in the negotiation process. Now, based on these objectives, we will have the following topics. The first one, conflict in the workplace. The second one, the outcomes of the organizational conflict. The third, sources of conflict in organization. Number 4, the conflict management. Number 5, negotiation, the third party intervention. Now, according to these points, inshallah, we will cover all the points affiliating with the conflict management as one of the determinants of employees' behavior. Now we start with the introduction. Looking at this company here, this is an example of conflict that can happen in any organization that is based on different reasons. Here, an intergenerational conflict, we have a company in which we have two different types of employees. The matter here is about the age. So intergenerational conflict is more common today because the employees across age groups work together more than ever before. Here in Fred Jets, an executive at Robert Half International Corporation recommends adapting to the different needs and work styles of younger employees to minimize this conflict, meaning that the way the work is done actually by employees can be different. And accordingly, such kind of conflicts can pop up simply because of how young people may think to be done, while elder and more experienced people can have different opinions. So in a way to solve this kind of conflicts, there will be a lot of procedures, and this will be inshallah during the topics we will cover inshallah in today's session. But before we go to these processes, we need to explain the meaning of the word conflict. Conflict defined as the following. It is a process in which one party perceives that its interests are being opposed or negatively affected by another party. Now, the point here is that we're dealing with different interests. So the interests of some people can be perceived as a threat to others, and accordingly conflict can exist. So that's why the process of handling such kind of conflict is actually based on our understanding to the reason why conflict actually exists. We have a process here that is referred to as conflict process. So the sources of conflict, sources of conflict can be so many. It can be affiliating with the age, with the interests, with the goals, with the values. So there will be different types of sources from which conflict can really pop up. However, once we have these reasons causing the conflict to exist, we will have then conflict perceptions and conflict emotions. Now, the way people perceive these reasons may vary the intensity of the conflict, which means that people are different in the way they look at these reasons. So things can be easy for the others. Others can let go of these reasons, while other people might consider them as a threat, and accordingly, a conflict. So conflict emotions as a result of such perception will exist. This can also be the reason to manifest conflict, which is either increasing, decreasing the conflict, and accordingly, we will have the outcomes of the conflict, which of course will be not in the good interest of the company in general. Now here we have task-related versus socio-emotional conflict. So task are about the kind of conflict that may result due to the type of the work being done, duties, tasks, relations, responsibilities, the power, etc. While the socio-emotional conflict are more about the individuals dealing with each other, the way they perceive the kind of relation among either individuals and departments, as follows. Here, the first one is about tasks, and this is number one kind of conflict. This is a common type of conflict that usually exists in companies. Conflict is aimed at issue, not parties, meaning the conflict can be a result of a new policy, regulations, or decision-making process. Basis for constructive controversy. Here, different opinions will come up or will cause such kind of conflict. Usually these kind of conflicts is a result of a unilateral kind of decision-making process, which means that the decision is just made by one party or one section within the organization without having the other parties involved. Helps recognize problem, identify solutions, and understand the issue better. Now, if you're talking about task-related conflict, the way to handle and solve this kind of conflict is actually by handling these issues, which is amending the process of taking decision process, or maybe eliminating such policies, changing, replacing, swifting, so whatsoever kind of action, policies that can help handling the task in a way to solve this conflict is still manageable. We're talking about activities within the boundary of the business, which this way or the other way around can also be solved. Unlike the problems that can be caused by parties. Here, socio-emotional conflict is way more complicated. So the conflict viewed as a personal attack. So this personal attack is actually based on the individual perception. So that is why this kind of conflict is somehow a little bit more complicated when it comes to the process of solutions here. Foundation of conflict escalation, and that usually leads to dissatisfaction among members, stress, and maybe turnover, leaving the job. Now, what could be the outcome of the conflict here? We have different types of outcomes which are actually all not going well to the interests of the company, as we said before. The first one is about the functions of the business itself. So we call them dysfunctional outcomes. So once we have an outcome here that is based on conflict, this outcome is very likely to affect the final output of the employees, which is productivity or even profitability. So this diverts the energy and resources, which is not good for the company. Besides, it also encourages the organizational politics among members or even among departments within the company. Encourages stereotyping. Now we have a prototype of a problem which lead to politics, and this can be repeated again and again. So this is stereotyping issue which people can be judged unfairly due to such kind of conflict. It can also weaken knowledge management because the leak of the information, the flow of information will not be sufficient. However, what can be the potential benefits beyond such kind of outcomes? It may improve decision making, just in case the company would like to have practical solutions to such conflict. As we said before, conflict can be a result of task issues, quite specifically because of let us say unilateral decision-making process. So if the company notices that this is the result of the conflict, so there can be procedures, policies, decisions as to take or to get people involved in the decision-making process and accordingly solving the problem. So this is a potential benefit. While on the other hand, It can also strengthen team dynamics. Sometimes the conflict can be seen as a threat. So teams work together to handle these or to encounter and come up with solutions to these threats. So the dynamic of team will also be improved. And that is another benefit of conflict outcomes. But actually these two benefits are not always guaranteed. Now let's talk about the sources of conflict. We have actually different types, different sources of conflict. Now these sources can be affiliated with, let us say, the tasks, as you said, the hierarchy, the span of control, the chain of command, the leadership style, responsibility, the power, etc. Some of the times it can be based on the values, clashes of values among the members. So we will take them one by one. The first one is about the goal itself. The overall corporate objectives of the company is not actually agreed among the members or the people involved, and accordingly conflict will exist. So that's why we call it goal incompatibility here. So goals conflict with goals of the others, not compatible with the others' goals. Okay, taking into consideration the goals of the financial departments and the goals of the production departments. So the product manager come up with the decision to launch a new product, while in fact there is no sufficient financial capability by the company or is against the goals set by the financial department. Here we will have a conflict that is based on horizontal flow of information, which is not appropriate. Now the second type of, or the second reason of conflict can be the different values and beliefs. This is a very common type of sources of conflict. As we said before, people value things differently, and the way they value things may create their own perception and accordingly will affect their own behaviors. So because of the different values and beliefs, we usually have different opinions which may really clash with other people. So here we have different beliefs due to unique background, experience, or training. So what you think is right may not be so with another person, and that would lead to a clash and a conflict. The second point is caused by specialized tasks and careers. Here we have people with specialized tasks handling these tasks with their own expertise. So if those people are somehow blended in, or other people are actually involved within the tasks, we will usually have different issues. The homogeneous kind of tasks are easy, but actually tasks that require such kind of specialities are actually better to be done only by those experts so as to avoid conflict. Another reason here explains the misunderstanding in cross-culture and merger relations. People from different backgrounds and different culture will usually hold different opinions, which also can cause conflict. Now the third one is the task interdependence. This is also one of the main reasons when we talk about task as a source of conflict. We have three levels of interdependence. So the first one is called pooled, in which we have resources goes to the three departments A, B, and C. Now this can be, the kind of conflict that can be here is about A trying to get all the resources to his own department. So the competition that exists between A, B, and C is actually based on the resources. Now this is a very common type of conflict in which parties or department will compete to gain as much resources as they can, as much information and as many resources as they could. So the competition here can be a reason for a very potential kind of conflict on resources. consequences of such kind of conflict will also be politics or developing lobbies in which such kind of departments to try to dominate other resources in the organization. Now the second kind of relation is called sequential, in which A relies on B and then B relies on C. Now the kind of conflict that can exist here is actually based on the final job done by A and is transferred to B. So if the output of A is not good for B, then we will have conflict. For example, in manufacturing, car manufacturing industries, for example, B cannot do his job unless he gets things from A. So if things are not done properly according to the standards, so there will usually be a lot of issues to discuss. Conflicts will exist, dissatisfaction of the work, because here C will put the blames on B. So the level of standards being embedded within the product, the final product, will be affected because of A's output. So here, most of the issues or the qualities issues can be the main trigger to conflict. While the third type of interdependency is called reciprocal, which means that each one relies on the other. So it goes like a circle. So the success of B actually depends on C, and C's success depends on A. And this goes on as the activities within the business carry on. So because of the nature of task in terms of interdependency, we may have different conflict. So these conflicts can be either the result of the uses of resources or the final output that is transferred to different department, or the cycle of the work itself and the kind of work problems that may pop up within. Then we have the ambiguity of task. Now talking about task, we should also talk about to what extent the task itself is clear. So here, the lack of rules guiding the relations will be a very vivid reason why conflict exists. So rules does not exist, specifications are not set, standards are not clear, so conflict will definitely exist. This encourages political tactics. So if people are left to their own or are not given enough policies to guide their relations, they will try to come up with their own. So that is why a very expected consequence of such kind of problem, ambiguity, is the political tactics. Then we have the communication problems, which is one of the reasons why conflict exists. Sometimes task has got nothing to do with the conflict. Rather, it's the means and the channel of communication. So here, conflict causes lower motivation to communicate with the others and also increases stereotyping. So once there's a problem with one of the departments or the direct supervisor or even the top management, there will be a tendency to communicate less with that party. So that is the reason why communication must be also developed in a way to help parties communicate in order to solve the problem. So the channels can also be different parties. Sometimes, if not done by the two parties involved, a third party can be also involved, inshallah, as we will discuss by the end of the session. Now we have different styles of conflict management. So the first one is called orientation. Now when we talk about orientation, we talk about a style to manage conflict. Here we have the following: a win-win orientation. That is based on the understanding of both parties that there is a potential solution that is of benefit to both parties. So you believe parties will find a mutually beneficial solution to their disagreement. And that is actually based on the interests of both parties. So if the first party, for example, comes up with a solution that is accepted by the other party, so we call this one win-win orientation, as both parties believe that such kind of solution is of interest to both of them. On the other hand, we have the win-lose orientation. So you believe that the more one party receives, the less the other receives. And that accelerates and augments the conflict, of course. Now, it tends to escalate the conflict and use of power and politics. If one of the party believes that he is losing as the other one is receiving more, this party would try to come up with whatsoever means to gain. So that's why they'll use power and politics to get what they want. Now, the conflict management style here is actually based on two variables: assertiveness and cooperativeness. To what extent is the other party cooperative? So helping each other, communicating, trying to get things clear to come up with a solution. This is cooperativeness. On the other hand, assertiveness, trying to get his own right without thinking about the other party. So we have, based on such two variables, we have different potentials. For example, if we have high assertiveness but low cooperativeness, then this is competing, which means that this party will try to maximize his own benefit on the other one. But if we have low assertiveness and also low cooperativeness, both of them will try to get rid of this problem, avoiding the problem itself. Now it goes on, high assertiveness and high cooperativeness, we will have collaborating, which is one of the good ways to solve problems. Both parties believe that we have to come up with a mutual agreement that may benefit both parties. We also have compromising, which is based on the belief of both parties that we have to come up to a point in which we accept a reasonable solution. So that's why we call it compromising, not quite high assertiveness, not high cooperativeness, it's in the middle. So the decision that is taken here is accepted by both parties. So this is what we mean by conflict management style, which can have different alternatives or different consequences according to the assertiveness level and the cooperativeness level of both parties. Now, subordinate goals at Tivoli's system here is an example. So the value of subordinate goals was apparent in a paper, Airplanes exercise, in which here, as you look at the picture, teams discovered that they succeeded by focusing on the organizational goals rather than fighting over conflicting goals between teams, which means that we think of the overall company's goals, because as we drop down, there can be different details about department's goals which create conflict. So in such kind of exercise, they only focus on the overall corporate objectives, which will in turn benefit, of course, all the department. And this is one good strategy of handling conflicts. So this reduces emphasizing common objectives rather than conflicting sub-goals, which may not really be that much important, and also reduces goal incompatibility and differentiation. So we have one totally agreed goal that we all work toward, instead of having different goals that we may have a lot of issues about. Now, reducing differentiation is a very important strategy to handle conflict. So, removing sources of different values and beliefs is one issue. So, whatsoever kind of resources that may expand the gap between parties should be eliminated. Move employees around to different jobs is another reason, or another way to handle differentiation, especially people of quite different values, and encourage generalist careers in which people can encapsulate different ideas and different opinions. Now, improving communication and also understanding. Here, employees understand and appreciate each other's views through communication. That is why, if the lines of communication and the channels or the tools or even the means of the communication are blocked, we will definitely have a lot of issues. So this can be either through informal gathering, in which people can blend in more formal dialogue sessions in which such kind of conflicts are discussed together, team building activities such as drum circles shown in this example. So these are informal ways in which they can build team spirits. Once exist, people can then communicate in a better way and can come up with good solutions. Now, other ways to manage conflict. When we talk about tasks, so we say reduce task interdependence. As we said, if you heavily rely on another person to achieve the task, there would be a potential to, or a lot of reasons why we have conflicts. So potential conflicts can exist. So the more you rely on this person, the more conflict, the more potential the conflict can exist. So that is why one of the strategies here is to reduce the task interdependency. This is by defining shared resources so that every party has his or her own shared resource that can enable them to achieve the task. Or you may combine the task under one department. Or you may use buffers, okay, in which these resources are actually assigned to this department, other resources are assigned to other departments. So there would be no mingling between both kind of departments. You can also increase resources, which is one way. If there is a financial capability by the company to handle this issue by such kind of means, duplicate resources, but that will have a great impact on the cost, of course, and also clarify the rules and procedures. So you clarify resource distribution and change interdependence. So this is a very important issue, especially in the kind of industries in which departments are actually linked. In production line, where the units are actually lined up in one line, and that they rely on each department to achieve their own tasks. Bringing zone model in negotiation. Talking about conflict, we should also talk about negotiation. Here, in this kind, we have your position as the first party. You start with the proposal. We call it initial. For example, if you're talking about a price, it can be $700, let us say. But your target, you know that your target is, let us say, 600. So you start with 700 so that you have enough space to negotiate. While the resistance is 500, which means that you can't go down this amount. So this is a process of negotiation. The areas of potential agreement is usually here. On the other hand, we have the opponent's positions, which of course will do the same issue. Same process, initial, target, and resistance point. So usually the agreement is based on both parties' benefit. That's why we said compromise is one of the reasons why parties sometimes reach to the understanding, believe that this is the kind of solution we can have which is of great or potential benefit for both parties, without which conflict will still exist. Now, the situation influences on negotiation. Of course, location, the physical setting, time investment and deadlines, audience, all these can affect somehow or the other way around the type of negotiation. Sometimes even the timing of negotiation can affect. If you're running out of time, you have no way but to take a decision because you don't have any other alternatives. So these can affect or influence the negotiation. Effective negotiator behavior. Sometimes the negotiation outcome may fail simply because of the one who does or who negotiates. That is why a lot of companies try to select quite carefully the one who negotiates with the other party, whether internally or of course externally with the other parties, such as suppliers or even governments. So this negotiator must plan ahead and set goals. Also gather as much information as he can about the other party. Communication is a very important issue here. Sometimes it's a matter of cleaning barriers, explaining issues can be the result or the main reason why we have conflict. So communicate effectively is one of the features that the negotiator must have, and also make appropriate concessions, okay, which is very needed. Concession is something that you have to let go so that you get, let us say, an accepted solution by both parties. Now, the points we will discuss, inshallah, the third point here is about the third party objectives. Sometimes if there is no way to handle the conflict between the two parties, maybe a third party can do this job. So third party conflict resolution objectives are as follows: efficiency regarding the solution, effectiveness. We said that the kind of solution must be effective and efficient to both parties in terms of cost, in terms of goals. And also procedural fairness. Because we're talking about a third party, he must be fair to both parties in terms of the decision being made, the timing, location, any kind of remedies being taken after negotiation process, and also the outcome must also be fair enough to both parties. Here the intervention by the third party can be very high in terms of mediation, or it can be low. Okay, inquisition and arbitration are also different types of intervention. Mediation is not mandatory. Sometimes it's just a means of solving the problem. But as we go to arbitration here, this can be very binding. Okay, so arbitration is the last choice of both parties. So both parties will actually be bound by the third party's decision, which is the last choice of solving the problem. So by this, dear students, we came to the end of our session. So throughout this session, we learned the following. We defined the conflict in the workplace. We discussed the conflict outcomes, identified the different sources of conflict, evaluated the strategies used to manage conflict, according to the reason, of course, and also explained negotiation and the role of the third party in the negotiation process. Dear students, you have an assignment attached to this session, number 10, in which you have to deal with the questions according to the policies. Thank you for listening to our sessions. I wish you all the best, inshallah. See you in the next meeting. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.